My husband walked away from home for 2 years and came back with a mistress and a year-old child. Silently, I handed him the divorce papers and took something that made him regret for the rest of his life. Hello, family. This is Voices of Auntie Ruthy. Before we begin, hit the subscribe button. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. City and state. I like to imagine your porch light, your night air, your hush. Now lean closer. I'm speaking in my own voice. First person, no tears on cue, no raised pitch. Just the clean edge of what happened and the colder edge of what I chose. I lit the candles at 6:58 p.m., the exact minute the Midtown light empties itself across the glass and turns Park Avenue to a runway. The short ribs weren't boiling. That's what amateurs do when they try to impress a hunger they don't understand. Mine were barely breathing under a lid, letting the collagen surrender on low flame. The gumbo sat center, a steam ribbon rising like the line of a hymn we all know, but only some of us still sing. Collard greens with smoked turkey eased themselves toward tender. Rice fluffed and waited. I set his place the way he liked when liking me was his favorite habit. Fork and knife parallel, napkin folded twice, water at 1 o'clock, wine at 5. Every gesture a memory. Every memory a bruise you can't see through foundation. I told myself I was making a welcome home, but in truth, I was laying out an autopsy. Cause of death. Faith. He'd left 2 years earlier, called it the project of the century, said Chicago would sharpen him, said the promotion would carry us both, said my patience would be a golden bridge we would cross together. 2 years, 1 promise, 11 apologies, and 1,000 nights where the phone didn't ring. I learned to fix a leaky faucet with a butter knife and a prayer. I learned to carry my own weight like it was custom-made silk. I learned that the worst kind of empty is not the room. It's the sentence halfway to hello that never lands. At 7:02, the elevator chimed. A small silver note in a song I'd already finished hearing. At 7:03, the door opened. He stepped in first, taller, sharper, that expensive suit anatomy men buy when they want the mirror to clap. His eyes skated past mine and didn't stop. Behind him, a woman in a white dress, sponge sugar posture, fragile mouth arranged in pity, and a sleeping boy on her shoulder with cheeks that still believed in mercy. My son, he said. 2 words, 4 knives. I didn't cry. I didn't perform. I didn't ask the questions that women ask when they already know the answer and just want to hear it stab. I turned. I walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer where I keep things with my name printed clean. I came back with a navy folder and a clear sleeve. I laid both on the mahogany like a coroner's kit. This is the petition, I said, voice flat as a winter lake. Already signed, and this, I touched the deed, is the house. His face performed 3 scenes in 10 seconds. Confusion, insult, calculation. Simone, because even before he said her name I knew the type, shifted her weight and made her eyes tremble. Mrs. Sterling, I never meant to... She didn't finish because he cut her off to save her from the line he wanted to deliver. They'll be living here, he announced, chin lifted with that charity men think looks like leadership. It's sudden, but be reasonable, Aaliyah. She supported me when you weren't there. The boy needs his father. We can work this out if you don't embarrass yourself. The dinner went cold. The air went older. I didn't. I only looked at him until the noise wore itself out. Then I walked to our closet. The left side was mine. Neutrals, simple cuts, fabrics that choose duty over applause. The right side was his. Navy suits lining up like soldiers, ties sleeping in their boxes like secrets, watches in a row with their smug little faces. I didn't say, I bought these. I didn't have to. The math hung in the air like cheap cologne. He puffed. He scoffed. His mother called. The phone turned into a megaphone for that generational lecture about men will and wives should. I pressed end the way a scalpel presses skin. Then I rolled a 20-inch carry-on into the living room, zipped with the single clean sound that separates before from after. I left the jewelry he'd mailed in boxes when he preferred boardrooms to birthdays. I left the gifts that were really apologies for absences. I left the table set for a man who was no longer welcome to sit. He said, "Think carefully," like I hadn't been thinking at all. I smiled the quiet smile I save for funerals, the one that says, "Somebody died, but it isn't me." I closed the door. The hallway breathed. The elevator fell. On the ground floor, a black Bentley stopped the way loyalty stops. On time, without trumpets. The driver opened, bowed, said my name without a question mark. That's how I left him. In my apartment with his mistress, his son, his astonishment, and my deed. Greenwich Village recognized me. The gate didn't ask permission. The housekeeper didn't widen her eyes. The old floors took my steps like they'd been practicing. On the third floor, the studio smelled like sandalwood and serious work. The frames were ready. The silk was quiet and waiting. In the corner, the phoenix I'd been building flickered without flame. Gold thread, black field, feather by feather until a myth stood up and remembered how to fly. Phoenix thread, my brand, my refuge, my empire whispered behind closed doors that were never locked from the inside. I didn't post about it. I stitched it. I financed it. I grew it slow the way oak grows. Rings in the dark, strength in the quiet, truth in the wait. I wasn't always silk and smoke. I was a Howard girl with a portfolio that made professors lean in and rivals pretend not to stare. I had offers from houses that only sign their last names. I had a path lined with lights I didn't have to turn on myself. Then I met a boy who sketched skyscrapers on napkins and said he'd put my name on a window taller than our future. Love makes bright minds generous. I gave him my Saturdays, then my choices, then my calendar. 2 years, he said. I built a world inside that comma. While he chased the skyline, I learned the city's plumbing and the cost of quiet. He returned with a confession swaddled like a baby and expected me to call it a blessing. I returned a folder and called it freedom. The next day, Camille Dixon clicked her pen like a gavel. People assume power is shouting. It isn't. It's paperwork. It's precedent. It's the clean line between what you hoped would happen and what you will allow. We filed. We didn't negotiate my worth. We notarized it. In her conference room high above the city's chatter, he arrived with a lawyer who believed condescension counts as billable. They brought spousal support like a ribbon for a charity race. Camille slid across the proof, time-stamped receipts life leaves behind when it thinks no one is looking, photos in Chicago doorways, a boy with the same mouth, contracts that never touched my accounts, registrations dated before the white dress was ever bought. He laughed until the pages taught him quiet. He went home to Simone's performance, the Instagram captions with magnolia emojis that thought they could bruise me. I didn't scroll. I was in my studio listening to needles sing. A week later, I saw them where the facade can't breathe. Mount Sinai's pediatric wing. She wasn't porcelain. She was pink-eyed, hair loose, shirt stained with a child's fever. Malik screamed with that clean ferocity only small bodies can manage. I stood by the elevator and let an old softness look at them. Compassion isn't surrender. It's weather. It passed through me and left me standing. Quincy saw me in the corridor and didn't ask for the story. He only said, "Don't let bad memories crowd your art." Those are the men worth hearing, the ones who can be quiet in a storm. While I was designing a lobby people would remember and a hem people would touch with reverence, Chicago began to cough. The building he bragged about started whispering at its seams. Steel that bent under math it should have respected. Concrete with too much water and not enough soul. Shell vendors blooming like mushrooms after a rain. Money flowing through pipes that never emptied into walls. The city sent questions. The questions found answers. Some of those answers spelled Hargrove. One spelled Darius. People love to give women like me villainy we didn't order. She destroyed him, they said. Listen closely. I didn't move a single brick. I didn't bribe a single inspector. I didn't steal $1 from a ledger that wasn't mine. I sat in my house and minded my stitches. Consequence did the rest. You can call that karma. I call it gravity. He came to my gate when the headlines found his full name. No suit now. Wrinkled shirt, that early sober pallor, eyes red around the edges, jawline softened by failure. He started with excuses and ended with the small truth. Help me. The old me would have reached for a blanket and a plan. The new me poured what mercy I had left into a sentence with no echo. Your consequences aren't my calling. The housekeeper kept her hands folded. The driver kept his posture. The gate kept its dignity. He left kneeling secrets on the sidewalk like gum. The divorce took one hearing and a signature that didn't shake. Judges don't narrate. They stamp. The decree is a clean word for a clean cut. On the courthouse steps, Winter was honest and I matched it. I didn't look back for his silhouette. I didn't look forward for someone else's. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that sewed flame into black silk, and I loved them for the first time without apology. When Phoenix Rising opened inside the pinnacle, the room inhaled. Cameras didn't swallow me, they tasted. A magnolia embroidered in silver white, petals so thin the light passed through dignity itself. A phoenix across a black field, burnished with gold so patient it felt like time in thread form. Quincy took the stage because men like him always do. But he turned his body toward me like a door and let the light pour past him onto the person who built the room. I stepped out as the founder people had only guessed at and listened to the applause without giving it permission to write my future. The applause faded. The work remained. We poured our profit, every persuasive dollar, into the Phoenix Rising Heritage Project down in the Blue Ridge foothills. A place where looms had gone silent and elders had learned to fold their expertise into grocery lists because nobody asked anymore. We fixed roofs. We set salaries that dignified 80-year-old hands. We opened a school where teenagers learned color theory from women who never got to name their art because they were busy feeding ungrateful mouths. Tourists will come because novelty sells. What matters is what stays. The muscle memory of a girl who lifts turquoise silk and realizes she's holding a future that doesn't need a husband to look expensive. Meanwhile, the Chicago scandal learned to walk on two legs. Hargrove yelled into phones. Simone cried real tears for the first time in front of mirrors that didn't care. Darius fired a lawyer, hired a better liar, then fired him too. Anonymous threads online became depositions. Misappropriation turned into felony. His mother called me from a number I didn't recognize with a voice that wanted me to be the girl I had already buried. Family, she said, as if the word was a rope I should tie around my own wrist. I let the call end itself. People ask me what I took from him, what made him regret for the rest of his life. The petty inventory is easy. The apartment because it was mine before his name ever touched my mailbox. The watches I left because they looked better as orphans than trophies. The so-called standing in rooms where only fools pace. But the real theft, the one that hurts in weather and wakes him at 3:17 a.m., was softer. I took my softness back. I took my availability. I took the audience out of his confession booth. I took away the one person who would have told the truth in time to save him if he'd asked for it before the police did. The day of his sentencing, the courtroom didn't feel like vengeance to me. It felt like accounting. You can't embezzle gravity. You can't launder physics. You can't bill an engineer for integrity. He stood there in a suit that remembered better days, hands clasped like prayer could audit evidence. Simone sat in the back, mascara honest for once. When the number of years hit the air, I didn't flinch. He looked at me. Of course he did, as if I held a lever he could still pull. The only lever I had left was my eyelids. I didn't blink. There's a rumor that I engineered all of it, that I had a task force in a basement, that I whispered into algorithms. People love to make a woman's backbone into witchcraft. Here's the spell I cast. I left. Here's the potion. I worked. Here's the curse. Regret. Self-inflicted, non-transferable, lifelong. Now listen to the part my competitor's audience leans in for. The cold triumph, the surface that doesn't ripple even when you throw stones. It isn't fireworks. It's quiet. It's the housekeeping of a life that no longer makes space for beggars carrying crowns. I wake before the sun. I walk the halls of a house where every door opens and none slam. I brew jasmine tea so clean it feels like a new idea. In my studio, I stretch white silk across a frame and choose the first thread with the same deliberation I once wasted on a text. Turquoise for beginning, gold for memory, charcoal for the line I will not cross again even on my kindest day. On an afternoon in Charleston, the air wrapped itself around my shoulders like a good shawl. The houses stared down in pastel judgment, the ironwork curled like vowels. Quincy walked beside me in a jacket that refused to shout. We didn't trade deals, we traded observations. He pointed at the way light makes a promise on water and keeps it. I told him how thread behaves when it's asked to become flame. We didn't touch. That was the respect. We didn't predict. That was the power. He said he admired my elegance and meant the part you can't buy. I said thank you and meant it without owing anything in return. At home, I opened the window and let New York be loud. Regret isn't my soundtrack. It's his. Mine is the small, clean sound of a needle entering silk and leaving without tearing it. A discipline. A rightness. A proof. Do I miss him? That's the wrong verb. You miss a train you meant to catch. You miss a call you wanted to answer. Him? I released. I buried the girl who would have waited one more winter because she believed loyalty could resurrect things that died for good reasons. I folded her gently, kissed her forehead, and wrote her name in the ledger of women who learned, not women who lost. Some nights, the city gives me back the woman I would have been without detours. I imagine her walking into meetings with designs under her arm and not having to downplay her brilliance to protect a man's temperature. Then I stop imagining because she is me now, without apology, without permission slips. A donor, not a debtor. A founder, not a footnote. A signature, not a +1. He writes me sometimes, not letters, vibes. A man's regret is a frequency you can feel if you've ever slept beside his rhythms. On the day Malik's paternity papers came back with a result that turned his spine to wet string, I felt a chill in a warm room. He learned a lesson I would have spared him if he'd spared me the humiliation of that white dress in my doorway. Children are innocent. Adults sometimes aren't even good at pretending. As for Simone, life taught her what I didn't have to say. Pretty is a currency with a short shelf life when you spend it on lies. The investors fled. The father of her son closed his door with a soft click, the kind that hurts worse than a slam. She learned how to stand in lines without an entourage, and how apologies taste different when there's no one left to serve them to. I kept my name. I kept my time. I kept the company he thought was a rumor, and watched it introduce itself to the world wearing a gown I sewed with my own insistence. Phoenix Thread sits in rooms where people whisper prices and say words like provenance and then go quiet because sometimes art doesn't want to be defended. It wants to be witnessed. I hire women who have survived polite neglect. I pay them like I wish someone had paid their mothers. I build pensions for hands that have made things beautiful for decades and were told beauty isn't real work. I write policies in plain English and enforce them without flinching. The thing about triumph is that it doesn't need a parade. It needs a calendar and the will to keep it. The thing about ice is that it is water with boundaries. People call me cold because I smile smaller now. They mistake the size of the smile for the size of the heart. My heart is exactly as large as it needs to be to hold my peace, and not a drop more for anyone else's chaos. I drive past my old building sometimes, not to punish myself with memory, but to thank that version of me for setting the table one last time so she could see clearly who sat down and who didn't deserve the chair. I remember the weight of the folder, the way paper can be both fragile and final. I remember his face learning the word no in a dialect he'd never bothered to hear. I remember the silence after the door clicked and how it tasted like oxygen at the top of clean stairs. If you're listening to this and you are a woman who keeps trying to resuscitate someone else's good intentions, this is the part where I hold your chin level and tell you a secret. Most people won't say because empowerment posts don't like math. Love is not a scholarship. It will not pay your tuition in self if the donor's check bounces. You must fund your own education and dignity. You must read the fine print on the promises people make when the night is soft and the wine is persuasive. You must know where your deed is and who signed it. You must build something under your name so that when somebody comes home with a story and a child and a dress the color of someone else's mercy, you can lay a folder on the table and end the season without raising your voice. I didn't win because he lost. I won because I stopped playing. That's the difference between revenge and release. Revenge needs an audience. Release needs a door. I chose the door, and on the other side was a woman I am proud to wake up as, even on slow mornings, even with hair I pin up ugly to work, even with no one in the kitchen but me and the kettle, and the sound of water making itself useful. Icy and triumphant doesn't mean cruel. It means precise. It means you don't let pity sign contracts. It means when a man kneels at your gate because his own choices took his knees, you don't confuse mercy with amnesia. You lift him only as far as the truth will bear, and when the truth says enough, you let it be enough. The first whisper reached me 2 weeks after the papers left my lawyer's hands. A call from a mutual acquaintance, someone who didn't know we were finished, saying Darius had been seen arguing outside a boardroom, his name echoing in an audit report. I didn't ask questions. I simply ended the call, closed my laptop, and poured myself tea. The world was already doing what it always does, balancing its own scales. Days later, Camille called. "Aaliyah," she said, her voice clipped but trembling with something electric. "We found something." I could hear papers rustling, the hum of her printer. He funneled money through shell suppliers during the Chicago project. The transfers lead straight to an offshore account, his name on every line. For a long time, I said nothing. I stared at the steam rising from my cup until it disappeared. "Do what the law requires," I said quietly. "No mercy, no hesitation." That night, I walked through the mansion in silence. Every footstep echoed like punctuation to a story already written. I didn't hate Darius anymore. Hatred is an attachment. It binds you to the person you despise. What I felt was colder than hate. It was closure carved in marble. 3 days later, the headlines came. Chicago architectural scandal. Chief architect under investigation for misuse of funds. His face, once the darling of glossy magazines, looked gaunt, cornered. Reporters waited outside his firm. His name vanished from their website by midnight. When the broadcast replayed his nervous denial, I didn't flinch. I had already buried the man I once loved the night he returned with another woman's child. Simone, of course, tried to hold her mask. She posted photos of family dinners, her captions a mix of denial and pleading. But in every frame I saw it, the fear. The cracks had started. People who once smiled at her now whispered behind manicured hands. That was the thing about borrowed crowns. They always slip when the real storm begins. Then came the call from Camille again, late one evening. "Aaliyah," she said softly. "The prosecutor's office will issue warrants soon. They'll want your formal testimony, but you don't have to attend in person." "I'll be there," I replied. He deserves to see the person who refused to look away. The courthouse smelled of varnish and old paper. Justice never has a fragrance of glory, only of dust and endurance. I wore a simple black suit, my hair pulled back, no jewelry except my mother's silver bracelet. When I entered the room, the buzz faded. He looked up, eyes sunken, hands trembling slightly as he recognized me. For a heartbeat, I saw flashes of the man who once promised to build me a home. Then the image dissolved into what sat before me, an architect of his own ruin. The judge read the charges aloud: embezzlement, money laundering, breach of public trust. Each word landed like a hammer on stone. I didn't rejoice. I didn't weep. I simply listened, steady, as if bearing witness was the final act of love I could offer to the woman I used to be. Afterward, as reporters swarmed, I stepped outside. The wind on the courthouse steps was sharp, clean, merciless. Camille caught up to me, files pressed to her chest. "It's done," she said. "No," I answered, looking up at the gray Manhattan sky. "It's only beginning. For him." Later that week, news spread of Simone's father's arrest: fraud, construction violations, falsified contracts. Their empire crumbled faster than I could blink. Simone vanished from social media. Her last post read, "Sometimes love costs too much." For once, she was right. I should have felt vindicated. But when I saw the photograph of Darius being led into the federal building in handcuffs, I only felt tired. Life doesn't need revenge. It writes it in invisible ink on the foreheads of those who forget gratitude. Still, I went home and stood in front of my embroidery frame. The phoenix I'd begun weeks earlier was finished now. Its wings spread wide, threads glimmering in gold and scarlet. I thought of burning it, ending the symbol of my rebirth. Instead, I framed it. Survival deserved to be displayed, not hidden. One evening, Quincy Davis called. "I saw the news," he said quietly. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I said. "I'm free." His pause was gentle, almost reverent. "Freedom looks good on you, Aaliyah." And before I could reply, he added, "The world rarely applauds the quiet victories, but some of us notice." After hanging up, I looked around the studio. Rows of silk, the faint scent of sandalwood, the city humming beyond the windows. Everything was calm, yet alive. I realized then that my story was no longer about loss. It was about reclamation. Every stitch, every scar, every tear shed in silence had woven this new version of me. Still, closure isn't the same as peace. Peace takes work. So I kept working. The final hearing felt less like a trial and more like a funeral for everything we once pretended to be. The courtroom was crowded with reporters, yet inside I heard nothing except the slow tick of the wall clock behind the judge. Darius sat at the defendant's table, gray suit wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. He looked smaller than I remembered, not because of distance, but because guilt shrinks people in ways age never can. I didn't sit behind him. I sat to the side where he could see me if he dared to look. He didn't. When the prosecutor listed the evidence, the offshore transfers, the falsified invoices, the recorded phone calls, Darius's shoulders sagged until his spine looked broken. Every number, every date, every signature bore his name. He tried to whisper something to his lawyer, but the lawyer only shook his head. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, he didn't move. No gasp, no shout, no denial. Just stillness, like a building collapsing inward, silently. Simone wasn't there. Her father had been sentenced earlier that morning. She had pleaded out to a lesser charge, community service and fines. They had all scattered like rats leaving a sinking ship. The judge's gavel struck once. The sound echoed. It didn't sound like justice. It sounded like finality. I rose, smoothing my jacket, and walked out before they escorted him away. I didn't want to see his wrists in cuffs again. Once was enough. Outside, flashbulbs exploded. "Mrs. Thurston, any comment?" Was this revenge? I stopped on the courthouse steps, lifted my chin, and said quietly, "It was never revenge. It was accountability." Then I walked past the cameras and into the sunlight. It was late afternoon. Manhattan shimmered in gold. Freedom doesn't roar, it exhales. That evening, I met Quincy Davis at the rooftop of the Sterling Stone Tower. The skyline stretched endlessly. The city pulsed below us like a living heart. He handed me a glass of champagne but didn't say congratulations. Instead, he said, "Closure can feel like an empty room. You'll fill it again, Aaliyah." "I already have," I replied, and meant it. Weeks turned into months. The media storm died down. My name shifted from headlines to design magazines. Phoenix Thread became synonymous with resilience and precision, two things I had learned the hard way. The Pinnacle Art Center opened with an exhibit of my embroidered phoenix suspended in glass, its wings outstretched under a beam of white light. Visitors stood in silence before it, some not knowing that every stitch was born from betrayal. That was my private victory. Letters began arriving, from young designers, single mothers, women who had stayed too long in houses where love had expired. They wrote, "You gave me courage." I kept every letter in a mahogany box, not out of pride but gratitude. Their stories reminded me that mine had meaning beyond survival. Sometimes I still walked through Park Avenue at night. The old apartment building stood there, lights dim, another family living inside. I never lingered. I simply looked once, then turned toward the street where my driver waited. You can't rewrite the past, but you can choose where to close the book. One gray morning, Camille called again. "It's over," she said. "The last of the appeals were denied. He'll serve 12 years. I thanked her and hung up. There was nothing else to say. The law had spoken. I didn't need to. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from regret, from memory. I walked barefoot through the mansion until I reached the studio. The room smelled of silk and cedar. On the main frame lay a blank sheet of white satin, waiting. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Then I took a spool of turquoise thread and began to sew. The first stitch glimmered under the lamp, small, deliberate, alive. Each new stitch felt like a heartbeat returning. I thought of the girl who once waited by the window counting days. She was gone. In her place stood a woman who no longer waited for anyone. The kind of woman who signs her own deeds, files her own petitions, and drinks tea while empires crumble outside her gate. By spring, the Blue Ridge Threadworks project was finished. Reporters called it a rebirth of American craftsmanship. I called it homecoming. Watching the artisans weave again in those restored workshops, I realized the full circle of my life. Destruction, creation, and quiet persistence. Every fall of the needle echoed a truth. What you build with patience never collapses the way greed does. Quincy visited the grand opening. He didn't bring flowers, he brought a book on Japanese textile symbolism. For inspiration, he said, smiling. He never pushed for anything more. We walked through the renovated halls, our footsteps soft on the polished wood. "You rebuilt an entire village," he said. "No," I corrected. "I rebuilt myself. The village just followed." He laughed, that low, warm laugh that made silence feel comfortable. And for the first time in years, I laughed too. Not the polite kind, the real kind that reaches your eyes, the kind I thought I'd forgotten. Months passed. One evening in early autumn, I returned from a conference in Charleston and found an envelope on my desk. No return address, only my name in trembling handwriting. Inside was a short letter. "Aaliyah, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm writing from prison. You were right. Everything I suffer now is what I built with my own hands. The only thing that still keeps me alive is remembering that once, before I destroyed it, someone truly believed in me. Thank you for that. Darius." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I lit a candle and held the paper above the flame until it caught. The smoke curled upward, gray and thin, vanishing into the air. Some stories need no reply. Later that night, I sat by the window with a cup of jasmine tea. The city lights below shimmered like scattered diamonds. I thought of every woman who had ever been told she was nothing without someone beside her. I wanted them to see what I saw now, the beauty of standing alone, the quiet triumph of peace. I whispered to the night, "This is what freedom looks like." The wind carried the words away, and I smiled. Tomorrow there would be new sketches to draw, fabrics to choose, colors to blend. The world was wide again, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what waited beyond the next door. So, to whoever listens tonight, if you ever find yourself betrayed, abandoned, or doubted, remember my voice. Remember that silence can be the loudest form of strength. Remember that walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the beginning of your legend. Because I didn't lose him, he lost me. And that was the most expensive lesson of his life. Before you go, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. Let me map our family across this country. If this story held your heart, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so the next one finds you on time. If you want more nights like this, your super thanks is the thread that keeps these lights warm and these stories long. On your screen right now, there are 2 more life stories I handpicked for you. Choose one and stay a little. I'll be upstairs in the studio, needle in hand, writing tomorrow's triumph into silk.